I think that the thing about the post, I mean, I'm obviously proud of it, but the thing about it, if it must maintain relevance, then the relevance I hope it maintains is that people watch it and realize that history is cyclical. And because history is cyclical, we know the ways that we can defeat fascists, and we know the ways that we can defeat racists, and we know the ways that people who are brave and strong can stand up and win.
Good morning, and welcome back to 5 a.m. Story Talk, my friends. A place to talk about stories in all their forms, the craft that goes into them, and the role that art plays in our lives. I'm Cole Haddon, and today I'll be joined by Liz Hanna, a screenwriter who sold her first feature film script 10 days before the 2016 election, and 13 months later attended its premiere with the film's stars, Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, and its director, Steven Spielberg. I'm talking about The Post here, the true story of the Washington Post's decision to publish the Pentagon Papers in defiance of the White House. A film that's gone on to take on significant meaning in Trump's America, where traditional media has largely lost such spine, which we'll discuss, don't worry. After The Post, Liz went on to write features like Long Shot, All the Bright Places, and most recently, Lee. She also co-created with Patrick McManus the critically celebrated limited TV series, The Girl From Plainville. One of the reasons I was so excited to have Liz as a guest is because she, like Ralph Ellison once said, and I paraphrase here, recognizes no dichotomy between art and protest. Her work is, in this regard, a series of acts of personal resistance. She's struggling with this at the moment, like many Hollywood filmmakers, since the film TV industry is now wholly in the stranglehold of corporations that can't help but align themselves with the powerful imperiling the United States and our world. But I do want to flag that while I share Liz's opinion that art is there as a form of political action, and even take it further by echoing George Orwell's position that the opinion that art should have nothing to do with politics is itself a political attitude, you should not simply hear that, and if you disagree with us, believe we are repudiating whatever art you're struggling to create right now. Art is not a black and white conversation as a whole, even if it might be for the individual. Screenwriter and Script Notes co-host John August was a guest on 5 a.m. Story Talk a couple of weeks ago, and you can find a link to that chat in the show notes. He brought up a passion project of his that he hopes to get the rights to. He pointed out that it didn't have any kind of provocative message to challenge audiences with. In fact, its message was unifying, the kind of thing that could, in his words, play across the states and around the world, and everyone can see themselves reflected in it. This caught me off guard, because 2025, and frankly the 21st century, has left the fight part of my fight or flight instinct constantly triggered. Art is my way of resisting, but also trying to make sense of a world that increasingly terrifies me. But the reality is, cinema is my religion, and I believe the experience of sitting in a movie theater in particular connects us across borders, continents, and oceans in a way that religion or any other art form never has. There is a power in that, too, a true value to our culture, which I will be discussing in future episodes. That said, not today. Today, Liz Hanna and I are going to tackle what it is like to try to create meaningful art, to use the tools provided to us by a combination of genetic fate and personal dedication to resist going gently into that good night. And yes, I am aware I'm dropping literary references left and right today. I can't stop myself. Sorry. Read James Baldwin. As for Liz, I want to tell you more about her now, but only after I point out that this is the most craft-intensive conversation I've ever had with a screenwriter for this series, at least at this point. I assure you, you are going to feel seen and validated, regardless of where you are in your career. Liz wrote The Post in 2016. It was one of those miracle sales, scoring so much heat so quickly that Steven Spielberg quickly attached himself to direct. This itself was a bit of spectacular luck, as another film of his had just fallen apart. Liz's true story, about the decision of Washington Post publisher Katharine Graham and editor Ben Bradlee to risk ruin by publishing the Pentagon Papers in defiance of Richard Nixon's threats on the matter, proved the perfect story for the time in the director's mind. Within a few months, Trump was in the White House, though, and the story of journalistic resistance to political malfeasance took on even greater meaning. Liz followed this up with Long Shot, which is a painfully hilarious political comedy starring Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen and co-written by my friend Dan Sterling. I cannot stress enough how charming this film is. It's truly one of the better rom-coms of the 21st century. Other films followed, such as All the Bright Places starring Elle Fanning and Lee starring Kate Winslet, which came out last year, and like The Post is a true story about challenging the powerful and defiantly protecting the truth. Like everyone in Hollywood, Liz has also worked in television. Her stint on Mindhunter was especially remarkable, I think, but you might know her work as co-creator of The Girl from Plainville best. It again starred Elle Fanning and was an incredibly inventive take on a true crime story. Invention which, in the bonus episode, you'll discover evolved from Liz's love affair with David Bowie, a love affair I happen to share. As for that bonus episode, Liz returns to discuss a seminal piece of art from her life, and mine, as it turns out, Bowie's 1972 album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. God, I love this part of the conversation so much. If you're a Bowie fan, you'll want to listen to this one. But also, if you're an artist of any kind, you'll want to listen to this one. It might just change your own creative process, or at least challenge it. Be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Likes and comments are helpful and hugely appreciated. You can find links to much of what Liz and I discuss, as well as to the 5 a.m. Story Talk newsletter in the show notes. Now, let's get into it with my guest this week, screenwriter Liz Hannah. Liz, it's so great to meet you. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
No worries. I'm delighted by this. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's a beautiful morning here in Australia. I wanted to start by asking what's giving you anxiety as a screenwriter this week?
Oh, wow. Um, huh. What's giving me anxiety? Actually, I have like kind of good anxiety today, which is that I turned in a draft of an outline for a new show for a pilot today to the network. So I have both like, you click send and you have like one lovely moment of freedom and you're like, it's done. I don't have to work on it anymore, which is now followed by the interminable anxiety of wondering what they will think and how the notes will come in and what the next evolution of it will be. So that's my current anxiety is notes.
When I hit send, somehow I've become better at this, but 5 minutes later I realize, oh, I forgot to make that change, and I
Oh
could.
yeah.
Yes. Do you send
I
multiple drafts afterward, apologizing?
I don't do it all the time, but it definitely happens to me. For me, it's more of like an obsessive, like I go back and read the email over and over again and I'm like, did I say it all the right way? Is that funny? Will that be offensive? And then I like read the outline again and I'm like, okay, I'll go through the notes again, even though I've turned it in already. Like we did a studio round of notes. I like go through their notes, be like, did I answer that appropriately? So I definitely like over analyze it, which I'm sure helps with the anxiety a ton.
Well, congratulations for delivering it.
Thank
That's
you.
fantastic. Are you mostly working in television these days, or a nice balance?
I'm working in both, which is lovely. I primarily sort of like my day-to-day right now is television because I have this series and another one that I'm taking out next month. So there's a balance there, but then I'm writing something for me right now in features, which is really lovely. But sort of going to your first question, the larger question of anxiety is definitely I'm writing something that I've been wanting to write for a very long time, but is sort of I'm trying to balance how I feel about the current moment in our world and in United States politics and the politics of America as it affects the world and sort of how I as an artist am like centered in it, at least in terms of like what I can do because there's nothing other than activism and being vocal that I can do as I'm not a policymaker or a politician than my job. And so it's a political film and it's something that I am putting, I think, a lot of pressure on myself to say a lot of things. And so my anxiety is both like just finish it, asshole, and and like make it excellent.
Of
So
course.
that's like the constant backdrop of my anxiety.
I'm sure we're going to talk about politics quite a bit, given the content of your work so far. Maybe look backwards a bit. I don't do a lot of research before these conversations. I usually start from the place of I know your work and I want to get to know you a bit. So I'm curious, where did you grow up and what brought you to Los Angeles?
I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in New York and Connecticut, and I loved movies. I loved watching them. I loved the idea of being involved in making them. It was really simple. Raiders of the Lost Ark was the first movie I remember ever watching and being like, I think that's a movie. Like, there's something, like, it wasn't just make believe. There was something to it. And I went to undergrad at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, a fine arts school, media arts school, and then went to the American Film Institute for graduate school, and that was what brought me to LA. And I graduated with a master's in producing there because I was very not confident in myself as a writer, and went and worked at a production company in development for a few years and started to kind of get my feet under myself creatively, try kind of get my feet in the business and understand both kind of where I wanted to be and what I probably, I'm sure I thought I knew what I wanted to say, but I was like 26. And then left to write full time when I was 27 and thought that I was like, this will be so easy. I'm going to sell something right away. Did not happen, but really had, kind of ambition to write things that I wanted to watch that I didn't think were getting made very often at the time. Movies, political thrillers of the 70s, legal thrillers of the 90s, Grisham movies. Like, those are the things that I really grew up on that both were exciting to me creatively and I think had a perspective. And so I wrote the post as sort of on a whim on spec. And now here we are.
I'm curious about the leap to screenwriting. My wife was a development executive as well before she made the leap to screenwriting and had stuff produced. What was the impetus for you, the turning point to give up a job and perhaps a future that was already being laid out for you?
I mean, had health insurance, which was nice.
Yes.
I, uh, I had always written. I was always writing. Growing up, I wrote short stories. I wrote screenplays when I was in college. It was not something that I was necessarily. There was really the only thing that stopped me was a confidence to pursue it. It wasn't a lack of interest, or even I would say like a lack of like development of it. I was sort of constantly writing things. It was just like a complete and total fear and insecurity that there were people much better at it than me, which I still maintain. Very obviously there are, but I kind of reached a moment in my mid-20s where I had something to say that I felt that was the first movie I ever wrote was like a very personal screenplay, and it was never produced, will never be produced. It's happily lives in a drawer. But it was like a very important thing for me to get out into the world to kind of, in terms of my world, out of my brain onto a page to sort of realize that I had the ability to express something that I was feeling, something that I wanted to say that could be conveyed to an audience in this way, an audience that will only read it and never see it, but that I could get to that point. And working in development in tandem with that was a way that I really developed a skill of development, of reading, identifying projects that I found interesting, identifying different areas of interest, different stories, different people. I started to not want to give those ideas away. I wanted to hold on to them and work on them myself and see how far I could go. So it was kind of a convergence of many different things, which was like being cocky and naive and 25 and also having, I would say, like a modicum of life experience and trauma that I could put into something.
I came to LA after 30 or right around 30, and I was still young enough to not know what I couldn't do and take stupid risks and have confidence in myself while being wildly insecure at the same time. It sounds similar with you, that sort of 25-year-old. I'm fascinated by this, the idea that we begin taking risks and doing things in our 20s that establish us only to then later become the establishment in some way, whether we mean to or not, and the fear that gets in the way. It's a different type of insecurity.
100%. I think well, and it's also like once you get it, you don't wanna lose it, and so you play it safe to keep it, which is the antithesis of how you got there in the first place. I firmly believe in challenging myself and, like, doing things that scare me, even that if that's the harder thing to do, just creatively, not personally. But I think that, like, doing projects, different writing about different stories, diving into different worlds that I haven't explored that and finding different ways to tell those stories. Like The Girl from Plainville was something that I was really hesitant to do. I had just come off of The Dropout, and on paper there are a lot of similarities between the two stories. And there wasn't at the time, but I think very predictably we all could see this kind of true crime fatigue that was going to be happening, and I was fatigued myself having worked in that world for a long time, and yet I couldn't kind of get out of my head the idea of pushing ourselves creatively to tell this story in unique ways, both structurally, take risks from perspective and point of view and things like that. And so, on that show, we would do something called Crazy Idea Hour every Friday in the room, and we would wrap the room, and then the end of the day was anyone in the room, support staff included, could pitch anything, and you didn't have to pitch on the same episode we were breaking that day or same characters or same story. You could just pitch anything, and it was just so freeing and, like, such a reminder to continue to stretch ourselves and push ourselves and also really challenge each other and as well as reaffirm the safe space that we had created, because when you have people pitching, like, really batshit crazy ideas, you do have to give them that space to that you really have to put your money where your mouth is of the support, because I want that support as well when I'm going out on a limb. So those, like, are the things that going to what you said, I completely agree with, and I continue to try and push myself to do, because there's no way I would have written the post as, like, an unemployed 30-year-old who had never had any feature film produced. I would never have written that, like, put my life on hold to do it had I not had some, like, completely insane belief that it would work. I definitely didn't ever think that it would get to where it went, but just having the idea that someone else would see what I saw in it and, like, the belief I had in myself. And so, yeah, it's important to keep challenging ourselves and, like, to scare ourselves.
Why don't I follow up with that? I'm curious, with the post, Washington Post publisher Catherine Graham, as I'm imagining the thing that the character that most attracted you to it. It's the character I love most in the film. There's always an idea, a question, sometimes even a potential scene that seals the deal for me when I find a new story. What was it that you saw in it? What was it that you couldn't stop yourself from writing it because of?
I really couldn't believe reading her memoir, Personal History, which is exceptional and a Pulitzer Prize winner. I couldn't believe how much when I first read it, which I was probably 23, 24, 25, just how much I related to her. She wrote it in her, I believe, 80s. At the time of of the film The Post, she was in her 50s. I was in my early 20s and just found this, like, deep connection with this woman who was at this very pivotal turning point in her life and was trying to find her voice and trying to both find her voice personally and professionally, and it was just something that I really connected with. And I was sort of struck by I don't think I'm that unique. And so if I connect with her and there's definitely a universality to that story. I think there's any universality to a coming of age story. And so that was kind of what couldn't get out of my head. In total frankness, the scene of the movie that clicked the whole thing for me is a scene actually that Sarah Paulson's character, she plays Tony Bradley in the film, and there's a monologue that she gives in it that was kind of the thesis of the movie for me and the thesis of Kay, and I kind of built the whole movie in some ways around that scene, for no other reason than I was following, like, a very classic storytelling Aaron Sorkin structure, which was that at some point, somebody really smart is gonna have to give a monologue. and tell you what the movie's about. And, but I knew that there would be a lot of vagary in the movie just in terms of how I wanted to write it and how I wanted the characters to unfold in a character piece that was a slow burn of character evolution between her and between Kay and Bradley. And so because of that, there needed to be a central cog and a central piece of the story where there was an illumination for the audience and for, at the time, the reader. And so that scene, what and truly up until that point, when I was writing the movie, it was very like, and then this happens, and like she changes, and then this happens, and it wasn't until that scene existed that it kind of all started to become three-dimensional to me and begin to come alive.
I know there was reworking of the script after you sold it, but in the development of it yourself, in the writing of it, how long did it take to nail that scene? Did you vomit it out and get it 98% there, or was that months of reworking?
I wrote the whole script in 3 months, so there wasn't a ton of reworking it. I say that I wrote it in 3 months after thinking about it for 2 years,
Mm.
so it was a lot of sitting in front of a computer intimidating myself out of writing, and then doing a lot of reading, a lot of breaking of it, and not a whole lot of writing. But from sort of like the first day that I started really putting pen to note card, it was about 3 months till I had the first draft. And then from there, that was September. So then it was probably about, we'll say 6 weeks from then that it ended up going out to people and going out to agents, because that was how it originally went out, was because I didn't have an agent, and so I was looking for representation. So I didn't do I that really a lot of the times with something like that, I'll put a placeholder in where I'm like, and then they do. I mean, now also where I sort of have an idea of how structurally I want it to go, or if there's gonna be a central need for something like that, I'll put a placeholder in that's like, "And then this solves the movie." At that time, I had a really, really clear sense of Tony in my head. She was a character that I was very, very fond of. We lost actually a few scenes of hers before it even made its way to going out for agents, and it was just because it wasn't her movie. But I had a real affinity for that character and for who she was, and I had always pictured Sarah Paulson in my head, and so I would sort of just hear Paulson, like, Paulsonifying these scenes, and I was like, "I just wanna see her do that, that's really fun." And so I wrote that monologue, to answer your question, that monologue came out pretty effectively as it in the first couple rounds of it, and then it didn't change a ton from that finished draft to production.
So when you wrote the script, Trump was just running for office, but it was produced and released after he was in the White House for the first time. It accidentally wound up an incredibly powerful allegory for the press's abdication of its responsibilities at the time, I think. But in 2025, when I rewatched it for this conversation, it hit 10 times harder.
Mhm.
Can you reflect on that? And especially given what we started the conversation talking about?
Yeah. It's funny, I haven't really reflected upon it in that way with him back, unfortunately. I it's amazing at the time that I wrote it, I really, as I said, I had been wanting to write it for years, so it was really not intended to be a parallel of Trump's relationship to the press, nor Hillary to Kay in any way. There was no intentional parallel. I finished it in the end of summer, early fall of 2016, so it was done before the election actually happened. But having said that, there were very clear signs of how the press was going to be treated by Trump and by his community, we'll say. And that was only, of course, fueled after I sold it and after he was elected. And so the parallels were unfortunately clearer and clearer. Having said that, when we were making the movie in May 2017, I don't think any of us had a perspective that it could or would get so exponentially worse over the course of the next 8 years in terms of everything, but also in terms of just the press and journalism and the stakes. I think the stakes of the press are always high, but just how much higher they would get. So the unfortunate reflection I have is that we didn't, as a global community, do anything to preserve print journalism, which then led to a lack of preservation of journalism in general. Because I think when you tactically have to make decisions of what you're printing in ink, it is a much bigger decision than hitting enter on on a website that I could buy that says, that's whatever, without any support or standing. So, yeah, it's the reflection I have is deep sadness and deep fear. And I, I was just reading an article about somebody being like, the glass is half full. And I was like, okay, that's a hot take.
Dude.
Uh, so I'm not to be like a total downer, but the thing I will say that is unchanged and unfailing is I believe in journalists. I believe in journalism. I believe that our only way forward is truth and that there is power in truth and that there is power in the press. Unfortunately, that power is given and not earned, because if it was earned, then we would still have the tent poles of our society that we believe in, that we have trusted for over 100 years to define these things for us and to give us the key of truth to power, would still have any semblance of strength, and they no longer do.
What I find fascinating about art is that there is what we put into it when we make it, and then how the times imbue it with additional meaning or transform it in some way, which I think is what you just described. You wrote what should have just been a timeless story, timeless film that, by history's sick sense of humor, was transformed into something significantly more.
I have friends that work on Handmaid's Tale, and Handmaid's Tale and The Post had this very bizarre parallel where both projects became very prominent because of their connection to what was happening in the world, and specifically our country in 2016 and 2017, and the reflection they were putting on all of it. Handmaid's Tale, obviously not a book that was written in 2016. The Post, about something that happened in 1971. Neither of these things were present day, and yet were very reflective of society, and therefore were actually quite prominent because of that. If you could tell me that I could throw away the last 8 years, and in that meant that nobody ever read The Post, I think everybody on Handmaid's Tale would agree. It's a very bizarre world to live in, where your success is in somewhat parallel to the destruction of the world. So it is a very bizarre experience to have. I think that the thing about The Post that am I'm obviously proud of it, but the thing about it that, if it must maintain relevance, then the relevance I hope it maintains is that people watch it and realize that history is cyclical. And because history is cyclical, we know the ways that we can defeat fascists, and we know the ways that we can defeat racists, and we know the ways that people who are brave and strong can stand up and win, and that we should just take notes and continue to listen to our elders and learn from the past, lest we continue to repeat it.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, what a horrible description of one's own work. Just like the timing of it, it's just so traumatic to hear it as another writer. Uh, I can't help but draw comparisons between Catherine Graham and Laureen Powell Jobs of The Atlantic as well, who similarly took on the U.S. government by publishing a story that other editors wouldn't, including, I think, the Washington Post's current owner or publisher, certainly, Signalgate. It wouldn't have let them
Mhm.
see the light of day. Did you make that observation yourself?
I would say that the observation that no, but I would say the observation that I have more aptly made is that the current owner of the Washington Post doesn't bear an ounce of reflection of the former.
Excellent. So before I move on from the post, I want to ask one more question because you sold it and then it entered into the world of development and production with Steven Spielberg, who knows a thing or two about
He has a
filmmaking.
real future ahead of him. I'm
Yeah,
glad I gave him a shot.
yeah, yeah. I'm glad you took that risk
It
with
was a tough
him.
decision.
So I'm curious, as a screenwriter who's just sold that screenplay she wrote in 3 months, was there anything by the time it showed up on screen, by what you originated, that made you say, "Fuck," like that's something I could have done better. Something that taught you something about your own storytelling and screenwriting because of Spielberg's interpretation of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to this. One is that this is in total truth, and anybody in my personal life would tell you that I feel this way, and I'm not just saying it publicly on a podcast. To live in a world where Steven Spielberg has directed your first movie, and that I was able to be on set for almost the entirety of production, and the relationship that then I have with him and his team, and the process then of releasing the movie and all of that, it's like not one that you nitpick. It's one that, like, it is not ever not surreal. There's never a moment I'm like, truly, there is never a moment that it's not surreal. I was at the LA Phil about a month ago. They were doing, Dudamel was doing a John Williams tribute, and Yo-Yo Ma was performing, and he performed this concerto that John Williams had written for Yo-Yo Ma, and then he performed the Schindler's List theme, and they did a whole retrospective of John's work. And I was just sitting and we just bought tickets since we were just purveyors of this experience. And I was just sitting there and I was like, John Williams did the score for The Post. Like, Steven Spielberg directed The Post. Like, there really, I really don't mean to be hyperbolic about it, but it's like never not strange. It just isn't. And I hope it is always that way, because it is just such an incredible reality to live in, though it seems surreal. Having said that, I don't watch my work after it's done. If I'm running it or if I'm directing it and therefore I am required to be in post, I watch it endlessly, and I somehow find a way to detach myself from it as a writer. But then once it is complete, I don't watch it again. The reason being that for features, if I'm not directing it as a writer, it's not all mine. So there is a ton there. Every scene has something I wish that I had done differently, or almost every scene, I would say, would probably have something that I wish I'd done differently, only because I hope that my last work is less than the next work that I will do. And so I hope that every work progresses me to be a better writer and a better filmmaker and a better collaborator, so that the lessons that I have learned on that would have made me better in the process of the previous one. But it didn't. So it's difficult for me to watch.
I love that observation, though. I would think most of us feel the same way, that going back and rewatching old work just reveals how much you've changed as a storyteller over time, as you should, if you're doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, I made one movie that I can watch, and it's because I really don't feel an enormous amount of authorship or own. I feel a significant amount, but it's not all mine, which is Long Shot, which was a movie that I wrote it with Dan Sterling, and it was Dan's. He'd had it for 10 years. I came on to help, and Seth Rogen was very involved in it. Jonathan Levine starred in it. Seth obviously produced and starred in. Sorry, Seth starred in it, produced it. Levine directed it, and they were all very involved in the writing process of it. And it was like this like beautiful ode to our significant others, and like this wonderful sort of magical scattered 4 weeks of writing this movie that was so fun. And the movie itself, I very much see myself in, and I see my husband in, and I see our lives in, and I also see Seth, and I also see Levine, and I also see Dan, and I see Charlize, and I see everybody else in. And so it was like such a movie made by all of these people that I don't have Like, The Post was something that I thought about for so long. It had so much against it. It was the movie that broke me. It was all this pressure. It's like, there's no way for me not to feel connected to it in, like, a very specific way, whereas Longshot is just kind of like, "This was a great time we had. This is so fun."
You're describing something that also sounds a bit more like television, and so do you have an
Yeah.
easier time,
No.
with okay.
No. Definitely not. I mean, I find television that I've run, is nearly like, Plainville I'll never watch again. I tried, like, a year ago to watch it, and I made it 5 minutes into the pilot, and I was like, "Nope, this is not gonna work for me." I will watch scenes every now and then if I'm trying like, if I'm thinking about how to do something producerially or technically like something that I've done before, I'll watch it to just kind of refresh a memory of how I've done it, but I can't watch it. I really want this to not be interpreted in any other critical way than it is against myself, because in all of the work that I've done, I feel like the performances are exceptional, and that's a credit to the performers, not to me. I don't mean that as like, "Ooh, I'm so look at me." But, like, with Plainville, Elle in particular, Elle Fanning, who starred in the show, like,
Mm.
there's just moments of, like, sheer brilliance that she brings in that show, so I don't want it to be taken as, like, I can't watch that. It's just for me, there's not even a devil and an angel, there's just 2 devils sitting on my shoulder that are just chain smoking and drinking while I watch anything I've ever done and making me miserable, so I just try not to do that.
I created this TV series, which was a catastrophe, start to finish, called Dracula, and I watched the pilot and then swore it off. And recently,
Yeah.
after a decade, tried to watch it finally, and made it 4 episodes in and thought, yeah, I have other things to do with my life.
Good for you, though, that's good. 4 episodes? That's nice.
But even with a decade, it did not improve the relationship to the work and my presence in it, if any,
Yeah.
which was, minimal by that point. But yeah, it just time didn't make it easier.
I think that I think even, like, the best of projects, which I really do feel very fortunate to be involved in a few in my time, in my career so far, they're like breakups when they end. That's just, like, emotionally how I'm connected to them, and so it's like when you listen to a song when you go through a breakup, and that song just is forever tainted to whatever the trauma is that you're dealing with, and then 10 years goes by and you're like, "Maybe I can listen to that song again." You're like, "No, just can't. I'm never gonna be able to listen to that song ever again," and the song is ruined and dead to me. That, like, is sort of my emotional place once I wrap something completely and deliver it is, like, I what I can do is I can read it again. I will read my stuff. I can't watch it because there's, like, a control thing about it, but I can read it to be so hypercritical about it. That I can do sometimes.
That's interesting because I've had fiction published, and when I go back even a few years later and read it, I don't even recognize the writer. I feel like I've already
Sure.
changed that much, and then I get overwhelmed by the fear that I will never be that good again.
Oh, yeah.
The old writing just sort of is more of a taunt.
Yeah.
Maybe things aren't going so well this year because you lost it.
So but then there's also sometimes, like, I worked on Mindhunter season 2, and there's this one episode that I worked on with this wonderful writer, Pamela Cedarquist, and we had it's I think it's episode 5 or 6, and it's the Manson episode. It's the episode where they go to interview him, and, like, I worked on that scene for months. Like, it was the big bad scene in our show, and we just all, like, took cracks at it, and it was like I think it ended up being somewhere close to, like, a 16, 17-page scene of dialogue. There were many phases where it was multiple scenes that were that long, there were many phases where it was longer than that of just one scene, and, like, the structure alone of that scene went through a endless sort of points of process, and sort of like, I've never thrown out and come back to a scene so many times for many reasons. I am really, really, really proud of that scene and of I'm very proud of that show in general, but I'm really proud of that scene. And I have revisited my previous drafts of that scene before to try and figure out like where I went awry and where we came back together and like where it all sort of worked. Because I think sometimes for me as a writer in the process, I you either complete something and it works and you're just like, great, I never have to look at it again. Or you complete something and it doesn't work and you're like, great, I never have to look at it again. But like there's something about the process of it either working or not working that is like diagnostic to me that you can it's the only thing you can control as a writer is like what you end up putting on the page. And the process, particularly through drafts of that, where we would do a lot of drafts, I've found so educational to go back and see like even looking at notes and seeing how like I responded to them and what the sort of pivots were in it. That is something I have found incredibly helpful. It doesn't help me to, like, watch the scene because it, at that point, has evolved into something else, but to read where we got to and where we started from, which, by the way, we ended up close to where we began, is really interesting and helpful for me.
Do you ever feel there's an invisible meter, like a video game, above your head where you're leveling up? You do that scene, you review it, and you think, "Oh, now I'm tackling the next one." You can just feel something has changed in you as you approach the next scene.
You know, I don't it's funny, I was writing this feature today that I have, again, been working on for an exceptionally long time in different versions. It was a show at one point, now I'm writing it as a feature, and I've been basically working on the first act for 3 months, and I don't know that I feel that way about material that has been finished. I think that there is like a every experience, I feel like there is a meter of leveling up because I feel like I've gone through whatever series of experiences to end here that I didn't have before, and so in that, I've learned so much more about myself as a writer, a filmmaker, a collaborator, about all these things. As a writer, I have this is now the second day in a row that I've been working on this project, this feature, and I, like, did have, like, a level up moment. Like, I got a little coin yesterday and today in this one scene where I was just like, "That's good." I was like, "That's really good." And I never used to do that, like, I never used to feel that way, and I never used to, like I would never if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would never have said 8 years ago, I never would have said yes. But I think, like, there's so few wins as a writer that, like, when you write something good, just fucking celebrate it and be happy with it and give yourself the moment to be like, "It's good." It may never make its way to anything other than my final draft, but it was good for the moment.
I've had conversations with other writers who say they have no ability to praise their own work, and they just write it, send it to their agents, and hope somebody says that they like it. That makes me a little sad because, as you say, there are so few wins to think of going 2 or 3 months working on something and not be able to feel a little like I nailed it today.
Yeah.
What's motivating you if you don't, if you can't, I guess, quantify your own work, at least to some degree?
Yeah, I think it's also I'm not particularly precious. Absent of everything I just said, or in addition to everything I just said, I'm not precious with my words when I walk on set. It's not for me. The script is the blueprint for me. I, by the way, have worked with directors who do not agree with that. I have worked with directors who completely agree with that. I reserve the right to disagree with myself when I'm directing a feature, but in television, I don't find I just am not precious unless it's something that is truthfully, like, going to define the rest of whatever you're watching or is necessary for the audience to participate in the rest of what you're watching. I just don't feel beholden often to what's on the page other than the sort of structure of it and where we're going, and I think when people start putting it in their mouths, it sounds different. Everyone sounds different. And I really enjoy the process of I would say I really enjoy it like 70% of the time, and the other 30% of the time it's terrible. But 70% of the time I really enjoy working with cast on set and finding the language that works for them. So for me, the joy that I feel when I write a good line is partially that I'm like, this will never see the light of day, and that this line will be like 4 lines ahead of this will be changed, which means all of this is moot. So I will have to change all of this. So like part of it is that there's one brief moment that it lives in stone and then it'll get erased.
I love that you just said that. I talk to writers all the time, and I've never heard somebody describe that feeling that I also have, that it's the moment.
Mhm.
That's the moment. You're just trying to write that great scene in the moment. It'll all get blown up tomorrow.
Mhm.
There'll be 84 notes, and then there'll be 84 more notes on the draft after that. But to find joy in just that perfect sentence or that perfect line of description just seems necessary. It's such a lonely job so much of the time to not be able to enjoy that moment.
I'm very well known amongst my colleagues and my husband for like screen grabbing a line that I write because I'm like, it will never exist again. Like, I'm not talking about I do this every day, but I'm telling you, like, once on a project, I'll, like, screen grab it and send it to my husband and be like, "Nailed it today. Like, this was a good one. I would like us to just remember this line because 'cause it'll never see the light of day."
I do the same with my wife. Again, she's a screenwriter. Is your husband a
He
screenwriter?
is, yeah. Yes.
So it's this, "Oh, look what I just did. I feel really good, and I
Totally.
need you to validate me right now."
I feel like my three-year-old is a heartbreak to my entire side of the family is, like, super disinterested in fine art currently, like, finger painting, any of that, he's just like, "Not for me, bro," but has recently realized that he gets attention when he brings home new pieces of art, and that we're all really excited to see it, and, like, yesterday, he brought home 3 new pieces, one that had, like, 1 pair of googly eyes, and one had, like, 1 little sticker on it, and I was like, "My man, you're expressing yourself, I love it, you do you." But he had this, like like, this expectation of praise by showing me this beautiful piece of paper with a sticker on it, and I was like, "Oh, it's me." It's like me with my one screen grab of a line. It's like me showing my husband, like, "That's my red Scotch tape on a piece of cardboard paper." And that's okay. Like, that's we like, to have the joy that a three-year-old has showing his mother a, like, purple piece of paper with a red feather that he's glued on it, like, that's me. I love it. That's, like, a perfect amount of joy that I'm looking for.
Well, so one last question before we move on to talking about a seminal piece of art in your life, which I'm really excited about. We're talking about The Post, and I've watched some of your other films like Lee. These are films that in some way or another about checks and balances, the fact that the press is there as sort of a citizen check on Washington, on the world in general. And I've always thought of Hollywood as a version of that. Messier, yes, but with a much grander reach. Yet I can't help feel like much of the media has largely abdicated its responsibility. And you started the conversation talking about how difficult it is to talk about these things. You're trying to put it into this new project of yours. Do you think Hollywood is up to the challenge posed by the Trump administration, the rise of popular fascism, climate change, and just in general? It seems like things aren't as rosy
What do you
as
mean?
Hollywood wants to convince us it is. And as somebody who's worked on films that are directly confronting this, how do you feel about the state of things at the moment?
You know, I saw Sinners yesterday, and I am an enormous fan of Ryan Coogler and will watch anything that he does, and along with many of his collaborators. The profoundness of that movie really has blown me away. I guess I saw it 2 days ago because I then just spent all day yesterday talking about it. There is something, like, I I'm s it's a movie that has kind of as much as I talked about it for the 24 hours after I watched it, I've sort of become speechless in reflection now. because there's not a better word for me to use other than profound, because I think it is accomplishing all of the things that you are asking whether or not Hollywood can do in a way that is forcing you to ask yourself if you want to ask those questions. Because there's a way to watch Sinners. Not an easy way, but there is a way to watch Sinners and have a great time and watch it as a genre film and a horror film, and to not take away anything from it, and to not sort of be interested to dive in or provoke questions from it. So there is a way to do that. There is also a way to dive incredibly deep on it and to go down a very deep rabbit hole of sort of how Ryan Coogler got inspired and what the inspiration was and what he was trying to say, which, spoiler alert, was what I did. And I think that, and that for me is a very obvious reaction to the movie, because there are things that he's saying in it that are just layered and nuanced and historical and prescient. So my response to your question is that I do think the filmmakers of Hollywood are up to the challenge. I think that the creatives of Hollywood are up to the challenge. I think that, as represented by Sinners, the public and audience is up to the challenge. And I think that the executives are up to the challenge for greenlighting that movie and giving it a theatrical release and putting it in IMAX and shooting it in IMAX, releasing it in IMAX, and for giving Coogler the rights back as part of his deal in 25 years. So I think there is precedent to say that the answer to your question is yes. There are a lot of things that we don't have control about in Hollywood. So I think that my answer, I will remain as the half glass full answer. I think that from the conversations I've had with my friends here is that the anxiety that we feel, absent of the anxiety of what's happening in the world, is how do we respond and how do we put that into our art and how do we control that response. So I think people are thinking about it and trying to figure out how to say it. Whether or not there is an appetite to be making those things, be them more provocative or less, is really what we will see. But Sinners feels like definitively there is. And I hope that everybody sees it and makes $1 billion so that this silly asterisk narrative never gets brought up again.
Thank you for that answer. And thank you for the conversation so far. It's been a delight.
Thank you.
As for you amazing people listening to 5 a.m. Story Talk today, thank you for being here with me. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with screenwriter Liz Hanna as much as I did. But don't go just yet. As promised, there's a bonus episode to come, and it's a great one for my money. Liz returns to discuss a seminal piece of art from her life, David Bowie's 1972 album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. We're going to get into why this glam rock masterpiece, but really Bowie himself, provides a roadmap for artists about how to create, how to discover their true selves, how to strive for originality, and so much more. We haven't talked about Bowie's influence on me here yet, at least in this podcast. It's been well covered in the 5 a.m. Story Talk newsletter. But Bowie is for me, like he is for Liz, one of the most important artists in my life. My debut novel, Psalms for the End of the World, is in many ways a long-form love letter to him, his work, and his cultural impact. I'll drop some links into the show notes about all of that. You're going to need to become a paid subscriber wherever you're listening to this Bowie-centric bonus episode, though. Alternatively, you can head to the show notes and subscribe to my 5 a.m. Story Talk Arts newsletter, where you'll get access to all my podcast episodes days, weeks, and sometimes even months early. You'll also get access to hundreds of arts articles, most of them focused on screenwriting and writing, many of them exclusive to paid subscribers, as well as the opportunity to join me for my monthly Ask Me Anything About the Arts chats to hopefully help you with whatever you're struggling with as a creator at the moment. Upcoming guests of this podcast include Black Dove's creator Joe Barton, First Nations Aussie fine artist Black Douglas, and the screenwriter behind the John Wick universe, Derek Kolstad. Next week, I'll be joined by epidemiologist Dr. Anne Remoyne. She's the director of UCLA's Center for Global and Immigrant Health. So we'll be talking pandemics, COVID and bird flu, and public health under the Trump administration. Thanks again for listening, my friends. See you at the bonus episode for some more 5 a.m. Story Talk, this time about David Bowie's brilliant The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars.